Ivy League, soft-spoken, class of 59, mechanical engineering degree. Occupation, race car driver. This is how Mark Donohue was introduced in the Brown University Alumni magazine. He's known for being possibly the most analytical and engineering-focused racing driver in history, and for winning the Indy 500 in 1972. In his own words, "I'd always thought that I'm not as good a driver as I am capable of figuring out how to make the car the quickest."
At 9 years old, he would drive his father's car around the driveway, and by 13, he was already messing around with engines. As a student, he drove a '57 Corvette after developing an interest in flashy two-seaters. Although it looked great, it was not built for racing. But that didn't stop him from entering a hill climb in 1958, his first ever racing event. He went along as a guest of his friend, who was a member of the racing club.
Despite finding himself against much more experienced drivers, Donohue actually managed to win the entire event. After graduating, he sold the Corvette and got himself a little Elva with which he could compete. He also got himself a trailer in which to hold it, and a $50 station wagon with which to tow the trailer. After entering his first race in this car, it became clear to Donohue that if he wanted to do well in these races, he would have to spend some time on his car.
Over the next few years, racing became an obsession for Donohue. While working as an engineer, he would spend every spare second on making his car as fast as possible, entering races whenever he could. Needless to say, he was a massive car nerd, and he began to make a name for himself among the amateur racers of America. Then, in 1966, he had a chance meeting with Roger Penske.
At the time, Roger Penske was just getting started with Penske Racing, his racing team, which is still around today. Penske took a chance on Donohue, believing he saw potential in his ability. He initially had to convince him to give up his day job, saying he could just try it for a year, and that as a young man, he had plenty of time to go back to engineering if it didn't work out.
As it turned out, this was a pretty good idea. Over the 9 years from 1966 to 1975, Mark Donohue and Penske Racing would become a force to be reckoned with. With Penske, Donohue would go on to win 3 Trans Am Championships, the Can-Am Championship of 1973, 24 Hours of Daytona in 1969, and the Indianapolis 500 of 1972, as well as setting the closed course speed record in 1975 at over 221 miles per hour. Of course, Donohue attributed a lot of his success to his engineering background, saying the problem with most drivers is that they just don't know what their cars will do.
Throughout his career, he would work days and nights on improving the cars he drove, searching for what he called unfair advantages. In reality, the only unfair thing about it was that he was more educated than pretty much any of his competitors. One of these advantages came during the 1968 season, when he was working on a Chevrolet Camaro to compete in the races at Daytona and Sebring.
At the Daytona race, Penske Racing had a problem. They couldn't keep up with the Mustangs that they were competing with. Donohue realised that this was because their competitors were spending much less time in the pits, particularly for changing brake pads. The problem the Camaros had is that when they slipped the old pads out, the pistons would slide out. This meant that the new pads couldn't go on easily.
Meanwhile, the crew at Ford had more experience changing the brake pads, as well as specialized tools that pushed the pistons back into the cylinder. Seeing this, Bill Howell, an engineer at Chevrolet, had the idea to put a vacuum on the master cylinder that pulled the pistons back in.
They already had a source in the brake booster vacuum, so all they needed was a pressure regulator and a valve so the driver could control the system. Roger Penske ignored the idea at first, saying that the guys who came up with it knew nothing about racing. But Donohue plumbed it up on the cars anyway, and after Penske saw how it worked, he quickly changed his mind.
And this little piece of engineering made a big difference to their race. 8 seconds was now all it took to change pads. All in all, it would take them 1 minute and 40 seconds to refuel, change all the tyres, and change the front brake pads, while the Ford crew would need 4 minutes. Penske Racing could gain an entire lap on them every brake change, or every 3 hours.
The results speak for themselves. At the Daytona race, Donohue finished in 12th place. After implementing the new brake pad solution in time for Sebring, he finished 3rd overall and 1st in the GT class.
A few years later, the uniqueness of Mark Donohue's engineering knowledge was highlighted in an exchange with a German engineer at Porsche, which was a tiny little racing team at the time. He was driving a 917 Spider for the first time and realised the car was terrible. It was a constant battle to keep it in a straight line at speed. Unfortunately, there was a crowd of about 40 people watching him go, expecting him to break lap records.
When that didn't happen, Donohue had to play for time. The car was really bad, but he couldn't tell them that. So he told them to adjust the accelerator pedal, just to give himself some more time to prepare mentally. He took another lap, this time getting really close to the record.
When the engineer asked what he thought of the car, he didn't really know what to say, as he had always set up his own cars, so he knew what all the adjustments were. Camber, steering geometry, spring rates, wing angles. But having never driven this car, he was at a loss. So he asked the engineer for all these settings and made a stab at his own solution.
He suggested they stiffen the rear anti-roll bar, increase the wing angle, and reduce the toe-in at the front. The engineer was so surprised by Donohue's knowledge that he got really angry. He thought that clearly Donohue didn't need him and that he was going to lose his job. They were all used to separating out the tasks between the driver, the engineer, and the mechanics. So they weren't ready for a driver that could do a bit of everything.
Then, in 1974, Donohue retired for 7 months. He has enjoyed a successful racing career, and his retirement was no surprise to anyone. He won 119 of the 311 races he entered in his career. However, when a friend and former teammate died in a crash, Penske decided that he was the best replacement and brought him back from retirement. In Donohue's words, no guy in this business is ever really completely satisfied.
Maybe he thought that Formula 1 would get him that satisfaction. Unfortunately, in a warm-up lap for the Austrian Grand Prix, that proved to not be the case. A tyre blew, Mark crashed, and the car went up in flames. Despite this, he got out and was actually conscious in the hospital later on. He complained that his headache was getting worse. This turned out to be a blood clot in his brain. Despite what appeared to be a very successful operation, he slipped into a coma and died of a brain hemorrhage.
There's no denying that Donohue was an incredibly talented and unique driver who understood the risks of racing. But Peter Gregg, a fellow racing driver, knew how insignificant that all was when it came to his death, asking, did the tyre that burst on his car know how good he was? And did the blood clot that killed him know how good he was?